In this tutorial we will have a look how enemy can shoot projectile, as you can see, and also these floating text numbers, as you can see. So in this tutorial we will learn about this. So without further delay, let's get into this topic. Over here, let's go to project tab, asset and sprite. I have it over here. I'm gonna leave a link in the description of this missiles or projectile. In the description you can go and check that out. So I'm gonna drag the first one. Let's select any of them, something like this one. It seems a little bit bigger. Let's make it a little bit smaller. So what we're gonna do, we're gonna select all of them by holding down shift and go over to inspector, then pixel per unit. Let's make it something like 200. More pixels mean the sprite will be small. And if we scroll down, then click on this apply all. As you can see, now it seems fine. I'm gonna call this something like projectile or missile, so let's call it projectile. I'm gonna call it projectile. And before we do, I'm gonna hit this play button in the top. Once this enemy gets inside of this circle, basically not enemy, this player, then enemy firstly chasing, and then after it we just printing out message in the console says shoot on player. As you can see, instead of doing that, we're gonna shoot out this projectile. So that what we're gonna do now, we're gonna add some components to this projectile. Firstly, let's select that, go over to transform. I'm gonna reset that transform, right click reset. And the problem is that we cannot able to see our projectile. Okay, so it's over here. Actually, I'm going to drag it somewhere around here. Let's add some component. So firstly we're gonna add, let's click on this add component, a rigid body 2D, and make sure you just attach that and make this gravity scale, and just click on it, and you can make this gravity scale 0, so it's not gonna fall down due to our gravity. Instead of doing that, I'm gonna set body type to kinematic, so it's not gonna fall down due to our gravity. And collision detection, we're gonna choose continuous, so it will continuously detect any collision. And the second thing, we're gonna add a collider or box collider. So let's click on this add component. Let's find right over there box collider 2D, and let's click on this edit collider, and let's edit the collider as the size of our missile or projectile, you can say. And make sure you just click on this is trigger box. Okay, check this one, make sure you just do that. And also make this one prefab, so we can spawn from this shoot point of this enemy game object, and also from this player game object. So that is the thing. So select the projectile and drag it into that is assets, or create a prefab folder and drag it right there. I already have created right over here, as you can see. So to create folder, right click, then create folder, and name the folder something like prefab, and then drag that projectile into that prefab folder. And we don't need into the scene view for now this prefab projectile basically. And we're gonna open up the enemy script. So let's double click that to open up in Visual Studio. As you can see, we just printing out the message in the console say shoot on player. Once this enemy once this player game object is too much close to this enemy game object. So what we want to do, we're gonna create two variable to keep track of when to shoot, when enemy game object shoot projectile on our player game object. So that's why we're gonna create two variable. So let's go to top of our class, and over here we're gonna create a you can say we're gonna make a public float, and sorry, public float, and we're gonna call this one start time. And by default we're gonna set it to 2. So if we set this one to 2, so every after 2 seconds we're gonna spawn or shoot projectile on to our player game object, basically from enemy game object. And you can pass any number you like, so that's why we just made it public, so we can adjust the number through inspector, so we don't need to come to this script and change this value over again and again. and make sure you just put if and make sure close that up with some colon. And let's create another variable to keep track of when to shoot. Basically we just creating these two variable for to keep track of projectile shooting, and this doesn't need to be public. Instead we're gonna make it private. So this will be private float, and we're gonna call it something like time between be sorry time between shoot, time between shoot, or anything you can call. And we're not gonna set any default value, and make sure you just close that up with some colon. And let's move over to start function. And we do know that at start function get called when the game start, and over here what we're gonna do, we're gonna set this time between shoot equal to start time. So let's go over to time between shoot, sorry time between shoot, and we will set equal to start time, and make sure you just close that up with some colon. So time between shoot, by default we have not given any value. So this time between shoot in the start of the game will be 2. Why? Because this start time is 2, and we storing this start time into this time between shoot container, you can say. So start time is 2, so that's why this time between shoot will be 2, because we directly setting it as you can see. Or we just storing a start time value into this time between shoot container or variable. And then we're gonna go over to here. Instead of printing out message, we're gonna firstly check if time between shoot, if it's lesser than or equal to 0. If that is the case, then we're gonna do something, and if that is not the case, we're gonna do something else. So that's why we're gonna type else. So we do know that in the start of the game this time between shoot will not be 0. Why? Because as you can see, time between shoot we setting equal to start time, and this start function get called when the game start, and it just call one time. So this start time is 2, so that's why this time between is 2. So and over here we checking that time between shoot if it's lesser than or equal to 0. But we do know that in the start of the game this time between shoot will not be lesser than or equal to 0. Instead this time between shoot will be 2. So what we're gonna do in that situation, we're gonna subtract from this time between shoot every single time some unit, so this time between shoot can reach 0, or it should becomes lesser than or equal to 0. So that's why we're gonna go over to this else condition. So this else condition will run. So in the else condition, what we're gonna do, we're gonna subtract from this time between shoot some smaller number. So minus equal, we can type time dot delta time, basically change in frame rate, which subtracting from this time between shoot every single time change of frame rate, as you can see, minus equal time dot delta time. So this time between shoot, if we subtracting from this time between shoot with some unit, and we do know that time between shoot by in the start of the game will be 2. So we subtracting every single time with some unit from this time between shoot. So that's why this time between shoot gonna hit 0, or it will become at some point lesser than or equal to 0. So in that situation what we're gonna do, firstly we're gonna shoot, and after that we're gonna set this time between shoot one more time to again start time. So we're gonna do something like for now let's print out a message if it's currently working or not. So let's check that out. So for printing out message, let's type debug dot log, and in brackets we can show something like shoot, sorry shoot, and make sure you just close that up with some colon. And after printing out message, what we're gonna do, we're gonna set this time between shoot one more time to start time. And we do know that start time by default is 2. So this time between shoot, once the time between shoot became lesser than or equal to 0, firstly we just printing out the message in the console say shoot, and after that we setting back time between shoot to start time. So basically time between shoot will be now to one more time. So that's why this condition will run, and this over here we just subtracting from time between shoot every single time with this much of amount. So somehow or at some point this time between should again gonna hit 0, and if it hits 0 or become lesser than 0, then again we just printing out the message, and then again we setting time between should equal to start time. So this line of code just gonna loop over again and again and again. So every after 2 seconds this condition will run, because time between should we setting equal to start time, which is 2 by default we set. But we can give any value we like. It's totally in totally depend on us. So make sure you just press down Ctrl S to save your code and move to Unity, and let's have a look on that. So every after 2 seconds we should able to see that message should just gonna pop up right away in the console says should. And you can adjust the start time underneath your enemy script. It's totally up to you. So just wait for to compile, and once it's done just do the thing. So if I select the console over here, and we can see start time by default we set to, but we can give any number we like. We can set it to 5. So 5. So every after 5 seconds that message just gonna pop up. I'm gonna set something like 1.5, something like 1.5 second, 2.5, I guess 1.5 second. So let's click on this play button in the top. So this much of time after every single time, basically this much of time, after this much of time that message just gonna pop up says shoot every after this amount, this much of time. As you can see, after 1.5 second the message just getting pop up in the console says shoot. As you can see that right over here, 7 and 8 and 9 and 10. So the message just getting pop up in the console again and again after this much of time. So I'm gonna get out of play mode. Instead of printing out message, what we want to do, we want to shoot projectile or that missile we just recently created. So let's go to script, and to do so let's go to bottom. You can do it anywhere right over here. So we're gonna make a function. So let's make a function over here. You can make it anywhere in your class, in your enemy class. It's totally up to you. And I'm gonna make void for function, and let's call this some function something like shoot projectile, something like that. Projectile, make first bracket and some curly brackets. And what we want to do inside this function, we want to shoot. So in order to shoot we need the projectile. If we move to Unity, then project, then assets, then prefab, we need this projectile or the missile we recently created. So we need this game object, then we can shoot this one. So we need that. To shoot we need to use this instantiate function, instantiate or spawn instantiate function. So this right over here, this function as a first argument will take the game object or whatever you want to spawn or want to shoot. It will take a first argument, and the second thing it will take the position from where you want to shoot, and the third thing it will take the rotation. So we need to assign those variable for now. For basically now we have to assign those. So let's make this one comment by double slash, so this line of code not gonna interrupt our, so interrupt our code. We just made it comment, and let's go to top of our class. So what we need, first thing we need is that missile or that projectile, you can say, which we just recently created. So let's make a public game object. So basically that is a whole game object, so that's why we have to type game object, and we can call something like projectile prefab. Let's call it something projectile prefab. And the second thing we need a position, position. So let's also create a public transform, a public, make sure you just making it public so we can adjust through inspector. Second argument transform, we do know that transform basically means position, which has a rotation, position and scale. And we can call this something like shoot point or projectile shoot point. Let's call it instead shoot point, and make sure you just close that up with semicolon. Control S to save your code, And now what we have to do, let's go to Unity. We need to assign those variable. Firstly, in underneath our enemy script, projectile prefab just gonna pop up underneath our enemy script. So if I just select this enemy game object, as you can see, projectile prefab, and it says none, empty. So what we have to do, we're going to select this projectile from that prefab folder or assets and drag it right there. And now we have projectile, or basically this missile you can call, and shoot point, and it says none, basically empty. So let's create a shoot point, something right top of our gun, so we can shoot from there. So let's create that. So let's right click on this enemy game object, and let's create an empty child game object, and we can call this game object something like shoot shoot point. And now let's go to transform, basically select this move tool, and I'm gonna move it somewhere around here, and you can select an icon for that. So go over to inspector, click on this box, and I'm gonna select this icon. Okay, so this one seems something right over here. Okay, and what we have to do now, we need to drag this shoot point to shoot point field. And what we have to do right now, just select the enemy game object, go over to inspector, then overrides, click on that and click on apply all. So whatever changes we made, it will be saved into this player prefab game object as well. Basically it will be saved, you can say. And now let's open up our script, and let's remove these two slashes from this instantiate function. So the first thing, we'll take the game object we want to instantiate or spawn. So we're going to pass projectile prefab as the first argument, and we do know we have the reference of it. And the second thing, it will take the position. So let's pass our shoot point dot position. And the third thing, it will take the rotation. So we're going to pass shoot point dot rotation. So shoot point dot rotation, and make sure you just close that up with semicolon. And what we have to do right now, so over here, as you can see, we just printing out message every after this much of time. So instead of printing out message, we're gonna call this shoot projectile function. And what this function is doing, it just spawning that prefab at this point with this rotation. So let's call it right over here. So let's call this one shoot projectile. Make first bracket and close that up with semicolon, control S to save your code and move to Unity. So we should able to say every after start time or that much of time, that projectile prefab just gonna spawn from this shoot point position. So just wait for to compile, and once it's done, and now if we hit this play button in the top, you're gonna able to see every after this much of time, which is 1.5, projectile prefab will be shoot out from that shoot point. So just wait one, as you can see, indeed it's just shooting, but the problem is that projectile just staying at one point, it's not going at all. And I think projectile is in the wrong direction, as you can see. Before we deal with that, what we're gonna do, we're gonna move our projectile. So let's click on this play button to get out of play mode, and let's go to our script. So we need to move our this projectile, whatever basically we spawn, we also need to move that. To move it, firstly let's store this projectile, whatever we instantiated. So we instantiated this projectile at this point with this much of rotation, basically with this rotation. So let's store this projectile, basically whatever we instantiated, into another game object. So let's create a game object, and we can call this one temp projectile or temporary projectile, you can say. And let's set equal to this. So we just spawning this projectile at this point with no rotation, and then after spawning that projectile we storing that projectile into this temp projectile container or variable. So this projectile is a whole game object, so that's why we have to type game object container or a game object you can say, and we have to name it. So basically we just storing that projectile prefab into temp projectile now. And now what we have to do, we need to move that. To move it, what we're gonna do, we're gonna use to move it. We do know that if we move to Unity, then a project tab, assets and prefab, and open up this projectile by double clicking on it, we can see we attach a rigid body, as you can see right over here. So we're gonna add some velocity to this rigid body in the direction shoot point is facing, or the enemy game object, sorry, player game object you can say. So we're gonna add some velocity. So let's go to, just click right over here in hierarchy to go back to scene tab, and let's go to script. And to move that, firstly we're gonna access the rigid body of that projectile prefab, and then we're gonna add some velocity to that rigid body. So to do so, let's go to temp projectile. Basically firstly we instantiate it or spawn it, and we storing that projectile into this temp projectile prefab, sorry, basically game object, or you can say this is a container. We store it into that, and now we just going over to container or that temp projectile or the projectile prefab, and we're gonna get the component. So we have to use dot get component function, not function. Basically we have to use this dot get component, and into brackets we have to pass the component we are looking for, which is rigid body 2D, and make sure you just make this first bracket and dot, and we will set the velocity equal to the direction shoot point is facing. So what we will do, so basically what we doing, we just going over to temp projectile, then get component rigid body. So basically if we just move to Unity, then assets prefab, and open up this project tile prefab, so we just moving over to this projectile rigid body, and to this rigid body we're accessing the velocity of this rigid body, and we're gonna set the velocity of that rigid body with some speed. Firstly let's get the direction in which direction we want to shoot. So in the direction shoot point is looking, basically shoot point, if we go to scene tab and select this enemy game object, so shoot point, as you can see, it's looking to the this direction, basically this direction. So we're gonna put a minus value, so it's gonna flip in opposite direction. So that's why, so we're gonna go over to there, and we're gonna go to shoot point dot transform dot right, and we will multiply that with some number. So basically we just getting the direction shoot point is looking. So shoot point is looking, as you can see, firstly we just going to shoot point, then this transform of this shoot point, then the shoot point facing, so it's facing this direction. So that's why we're gonna put over here minus. So now this will be direction will be this, now opposite direction, and that direction we're gonna multiply with some unit so the projectile can move. So let's go to our script. So we can multiply with 10f, any number we like, but instead of hard coding this, let's go to top of our class and let's make a variable for that. So let's make a public float projectile velocity, we can call, let's call it projectile velocity, and by default I'm gonna give 10f, and let's replace this 10f with projectile velocity. So let's type projectile so not prefab, projectile velocity, and now I guess it's fine. And control S to save your code. And now let's go to Unity. We should able to see the velocity of that rigid body of this projectile will be in the direction opposite of our shoot point. Basically this direction shoot point is looking this direction, and we put minus, so it's gonna so the projectile will go opposite of shoot point direction. So let's have a look on that. So let's click on this play button in the top, and we should able to see that projectile velocity will be 10 unit. So just wait. Okay, so the problem is that it just going uh, it's little bit weird. So what we have to do, basically we're gonna go over to our script. Instead of doing transform dot right shoot point, what we're gonna do, we're gonna do over here shoot point dot up. Shoot point dot up. Basically shoot point dot up right over here means this position. Shoot point dot up means this position, this position. So that's why we're gonna put right over here minus. So the position will be now this one. Shoot point dot up means y in the 1, y in the 1, and 0 in the x. So that's why so, and we put right over here minus. So minus 1 will be so which will be the down. So let's have a look on that. So make sure you just press down Control S on your keyboard, and go over to Unity and click on this play button, and we should able to see that just gonna happen right away. So let's click on this play button in the top, and let's have a look on it. So okay, so it's now fine, as you can see. I hope you get the idea. So let me explain what shoot point dot up means. So shoot point dot up means this y in the 1 and 0 in the x. So basically up direction, but we put right over here minus, as you can see. So that's why so minus 1 becomes in the down, and we just multiplying that direction with 10. So minus 10, which will be down, or the direction shoot point is looking. But the problem is that you can see the prefab of this enemy or this projectile, basically it's opposite direction. It's just going opposite direction. So what we can do, we can just flip that. In order to flip that, we're going to go over to this projectile. So let's go to project tab, then assets, prefab, and let's open up this projectile by double clicking on it. And what we can do, we can go over to inspector, then sprite renderer, and we can put right over here flip. Basically in the vertically we want to flip, as you can see we just flip that. Now we should able to see it's gonna be fine. So let's go to scene tab one more time, and let's click on this play button in the top and have a look on it. And we will create a floating text, basically floating text. We should able to show so sorry, see. So as you can see, now the projectile looks pretty much good. It just looking in the direction player is going, or the projectile just shooting the play direction player is going, as you can see. So I hope you get the idea of this. Now what we have to do, we need to deal with floating text. So I'm gonna get out of play mode. To make floating text, what we will do, let's go to hierarchy, right click, then go to canvas, sorry, go to UI, and then canvas. Or what you can do, go to UI and select this text mesh pro, and you're gonna able to see and field just gonna pop up, say import essential import, I guess something like that. So just click on that, and you are done. And now what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna delete this canvas as well as this event system. We don't need it. Instead we're gonna create an empty game object. So to do so, let's go to hierarchy, right click, and then click on this create empty game object. And what we want, I'm gonna reset the transform of this game object. To do so, let's go to transform, right click, and reset it somewhere around here, I guess. And now I'm going to call this something, this game object floating text, something like that. I'm going to call it instead text. And what we will do, we're going to add component to this game object. To do so, we're going to add a text component. So let's click on this add component and find over there text mesh, sorry, find over there text mesh, this one text mesh. Make sure you just do that, and go just click on it and choose this character size to something like 0.1, and we barely able to see our text. To see, let's increase this font size, font size something like this, I guess, and we are not able to see our text because if I select this text, move it somewhere around here. Okay, we're not able to see because we haven't put it any text right over here. As you can see, text field is blank, totally blank. So what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna put something like 1, or we can put 100 instead, and it's flip weird direction. So we're gonna put character size something like zero point 0.1, so it will be positive. Now we are able to see this number, as you can see. And what we can do, we can increase the font size. So I'm gonna make it somewhere around 90. 90, I guess 90 seems pretty cool. And what we make sure you just make this character size zero point 0.1 or less. Don't make it a negative number, or it will be flipped weirdly like this. So that's why we're gonna just put zero point 0.1, a smaller number. And make after doing this, make this font size a little bit bigger, something like 100 or 90. And what we're gonna do, we're gonna make some animation. Firstly, this will be it will go up and it will fade out. And instead of doing that, we're gonna create an empty game object. If we do inside of this text, it's gonna once we try to spawn this text or to show that, it will be some kind of give us a weird rotation, something like that. So that's why we're gonna create an empty game object, and then we will make this one or this text child of that game object, and we can locally just do the things to do so. Let's go to hierarchy one more time, right click, then create an empty game object, and we can call this game object something like text parent or floating text parent or anything we can. I'm gonna call this one floating text. And then let's go to transform. Make sure you just right click and reset the transform. And now reset, I'm gonna drag it somewhere around here, and you can select an icon for that if you like. So I'm gonna go over to inspector, let's click on this box, and I'm gonna choose something yellow, this one. And now let's select this text and just place it top of this floating text. And what we have to do, let's select this text now, go over to transform, right click and reset the transform. Now as you can see, it just set it up, and we can drag it somewhere around here in the center. We can say right click, reset. So it just, we can drag it somewhere around here. Now if we try to move this floating text, now as you can see, the text is just going with it. Why? Because the text basically this text is a child of our this floating text game object. And now we are ready to create our animation. To create that, what we have to do, we need to go over to window, then in the bottom we can find the animation tab, animation, or the control 6, the shortcut key, and also this animator tab, as you can see. So I have it over here, so I'm gonna drag it somewhere around here, and let's create the animation. To before we create the animation, let's create a animation folder. To create that, let's go to project tab, assets, let's right click on assets, then create folder, and let's call this folder something like animation. Why we creating folder? And basically to keep all of the things in organized way. So that's why we just created folder to make it cleaner, our assets folder. And we can create a script folder, and we can track all of this script right there as well. Before we do that, let's do these things. So I'm gonna select this text, not the parent one. Make sure you just select the child one, which is this text, not the parent one. Make sure you just do that. Select the child, go over to animation tab, and then click on this create button to create our animation. And we're gonna go over to assets, and in assets we created a animation folder. As you can see, we can see over here. So let's open that up by double clicking on it, and let's create a subfolder as well into that. So right click, new folder, and we can call this folder something like animation, text animation we can call text animation, and just click on basically hit enter, and let's open up that subfolder as well by double clicking on it, and we have to name the animation. So let's call this something like floating text animation, floating text animation, floating text animation, and then click on save, and we are ready to create our animation. So what I'm gonna do, in the basically I'm gonna make the font something like smaller, somewhere around here. I'm gonna make it smaller, so as you can see we barely able to see. Let's make it 50 instead, and make sure I'm gonna drag it somewhere around here, and it's fine. Basically just drag the text center of this parent game object, basically floating text, just move it center, and we are ready to create our animation. To create that, make sure you just click on this red button in animation tab to record your animation, and we're gonna move 1 second in the timeline. We're gonna move 1 second, and what we're gonna do now, we're gonna drag this text in the up, and we will make the font size something like, we can make it 100. And now if we click on this play button, as you can see the text becoming basically the text just what you can say, basically the text just you can say it's becoming bigger, and then it just stopping right there. And after that, what we want to do, you can just you can also can rotate like this. If we select this text, go over to transform, then rate rotation, we can rotate like this. So if we click on this play button, as you can see rotation animation also playing. I'm not gonna do that, instead I'm gonna delete. So let's select all of them and click on delete. Instead what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna move over to one frame, and I'm gonna move this up a little bit, something like this. And after that, I'm gonna make the font size a little bit larger, means twice, something 100. And if we just click on this play button, we can see that the floating text, it's now fine. And once you are pretty fine, you can do whatever you like. You can just make this color to a channel to down, so it's just gonna fade out. It's totally up to you. I'm not gonna do that. Once it's done or fine with your animation, just click on this record button one more time to capture that. And I'm gonna drag this animation tab in the bottom. Now we don't need. And if we select this text game object and move over to animator tab, as you can see floating text animation will be played right away the game starts. So let's have a look on that. Let's click on this play button. You're gonna able to see this text will go up, and it will be it will scale in this size. So just wait, because we increase the text size. As you can see, it's indeed, and it is the animation just looping over again and again. And what we're gonna do, we're gonna stop that. So in order to stop that, so we're gonna get out of play mode. To stop that, let's go to project tab, then assets, and where we created the animation, let's go right there. So in animation folder, and we also created a subfolder text animation. So let's go there and let's select this animation. As you can see, we are able to see floating text animation. Select that and go over to inspector. You can see loop time. So what you can do, you can just uncheck that. Now the animation will not be looped. And what we want to do, by default we don't want this animation text to laying around a hierarchy or in the scene view. Instead we just want to pop this up once this player takes damage. So what we will do, we will make this prefab. Make sure you just select the parent one, select that and drag it into that prefab folder or into assets folder. Now it's turned into a prefab. Now we can just select that and delete from hierarchy or in the scene view. And we just want to pop basically want to pop up, basically want to spawn once this player game object collide with those projectile. So let's open up our player script. So let's select that, double click that to open up in Visual Studio. And for that we're gonna use a collision inter 2D on trigger inter 2D function, and on trigger inter 2D function. To do so, let's go to basically open up your player script, and let's go to bottom. For that, we're gonna use this on trigger enter 2d function, and this function right over here get called when we gonna trigger with something. We do know, we if we open up the missile prefab or the projectile prefab, we just check this box. As you can see, sorry, if we just go over to box collider, we just set this is triggered to true. So we definitely gonna trigger with this missile or this projectile prefab of that enemy game object. So this function gonna call, because we're gonna trigger with that, and we can extract info whatever we trigger it with by going to this collision parameter. We can extract info like the name of the game object we collided with, tag, anything or any component we looking for. So over here, what I'm gonna do before we do that, I'm gonna assign that projectile as a projectile tag. So in order to do that, let's go to Unity and let's go to project tab prefab. Let's open up that projectile and go over to inspector by double clicking on it, and in the tag it says untag, as you can see. So just click on that and click on add tag and hit this plus icon, name the tag what you want. So I'm gonna name it something like projectile. So this is our missile or projectile prefab, so that's why I'm gonna name it something like projectile. And after doing that, click on save and go over to that projectile game object one more time, and listen assign that as a projectile tag. As you can see in inspector tag it says untag, so let's click on that and let's assign with projectile. Now we assigned this projectile as a projectile tag. So let's go to scene tab. Now let's open up our script, and we're gonna check right over here. So we will check if collision dot game object dot tag, if it's equals to projectile, and make some curly brackets. So what we're doing, firstly we checking, and we do know that this on trigger enter 2d function get called when we trigger with something, and we checking right over here whatever we triggering with, we going to that game object, then accessing the tag of that game object, and we checking if that tag, if it's equals to projectile, and we do know that we're gonna trigger with this projectile of that enemy game object, and we assign it that projectile as a projectile tag. So we definitely gonna trigger with that. So in that situation, what we want to destroy the projectile as soon as possible, and after that we're gonna spawn that basically the text or the floating text, as you seen. We just want to spawn that. To spawn it, we need that basically we need that floating text prefab to spawn that. In order to do that, firstly let's destroy the projectile. To destroy, let's use this destroy function. Destroy Okay, so destroy function will take the game object we want to destroy. So in our case, we want to destroy the projectile as soon as projectile collide or trigger with our player game object. So that's why we're gonna go over to collision dot game object, means whatever we trigger it with or collided with, we definitely gonna collide with that projectile. So we're gonna destroy that. Basically we just doing that, we just going over to, basically we just accessing the whole game object. As you can see, collision dot game object right over here means that projectile, and after destroying, we just want to spawn that floating text. So if we move to Unity project tab, then assets and prefab, we want to spawn this floating text. So in order to instantiate that or spawn, we do know that we have to use this instantiate function, and this function will take the game object we want to instantiate. So in our case, that floating text. So let's go to top of our class and let's assign some variable. So first thing, we need the game object. So in our case, that floating text prefab. So let's create a public that game object. Basically that floating text floating text is also an game object. So that's why we have to type game object and we have to name that. So we can call floating text prefab, And the second thing, we need a position, so we're gonna just put a center position of our enemy. So we don't need or any rotation, so just we do need this floating text prefab. Make sure you just go to your Unity and open up the just go over to player script. You're gonna see an empty field just gonna pop up underneath your player script, says floating text prefab. So what you need to do, you need to drag this floating text right there, so you're gonna have the reference of it, and then you can spawn that. So let's go to script now. Let's go to script now, and over here as a first argument we're going to pass floating text prefab, basically what we want to spawn. And the second thing, it will take the position, so we will pass transform dot position, means center position of our player game object. And the third thing, it will take the rotation, and we don't want any rotation, so that's why we're gonna pass quaternion dot identity, basically means no rotation. And make sure you just close that up with semicolon. Control S to save your code. Now let's move to Unity. So we should able to see once we trigger with that missile, that floating text, this floating text will be spawned. And we do know that floating text game objects are playing the text animation which is going up in the child. We just created the animation, we're gonna able to see that. So as you can see, floating text prefab, and it says none, basically empty. So what we have to do now, we're going to select this floating text prefab game object and drag it right there. Now we have a reference. Let's now click on this play button in the top, and let's trigger with some first time or collide with first time, and let's have a look on it. um, as you can see, indeed floating text just getting popping up in our screen, as you can see. But the problem is that we also need to destroy this floating text after some time, basically after playing the whole animation clip. We do know after 1 second we just playing the whole animation clip, so at that moment we also need to destroy this game object or this floating text. As you can see, those are just lying around in hierarchy or also in this in view, so we need to destroy them. So let's get out of play mode, and let's go to script over here. And so we instantiated this floating text prefab center position of our enemy with no rotation. So let's store that floating text whatever we instantiated. We definitely instantiated this floating text prefab, so let's store into another game object. So let's create a game object, and let's call this one floating text prefab, we can call prefab, and let's set equal to this. So basically we instantiated this floating text prefab, and now we're storing that floating text prefab into this same floating text prefab container, you can say, or this game object container. So basically this is a game object, so that's why we have to type game object, and we have to name that. So we're storing that into that container. And so what we have to do right now, we also need to delete this container, or this where we store it, we also need to delete that. To destroy, we do know we're gonna use this destroy function. So as a first argument, it will take the game object you want to destroy, so we're gonna pass temp float text prefab, means the container or where we store it, comma, and the second thing, parameter, you can specify the time. So we're gonna put 1f. 1 basically means we do know that it's mean 100%. 100%, or 1 basically, if we just put 1f mean 1 second, so after 1 second we just completing the whole animation clip. So I'm gonna put something like 1.01f, or we can put something like 09f to make it more noticeable. And make sure you just close that off with semicolon. Instead you can just put right over here 1f mean 1 second. I just extended the time a little bit to see that. Okay, it's totally up to you how much you want. Make sure you just press down Control S and go over to Unity. So now we should able to see after 1 second or after 1.09 second, the floating text game will also be just gonna delete right away or destroy right away because we have we used that destroy function. So just wait for to compile, and once it's done, just click on this play button in the top and have a look on it. Don't know why it's taking a little bit longer time, but once it's done, just do that thing. Okay, it's taking a little bit longer time. It should not take because I don't have any fast system. I really apologize, guys. I really apologize for that. Now if we click on this play button in the top, have a look, we should able to see after 1.09 second floating text will be destroyed right away. So let's have a look. So as you can see, after that amount of time, the floating text just getting destroyed from the hierarchy as well as in the scene view, as you can see. So I hope you get the idea of this, how you can just make floating text and just it just gonna float around in the space. I hope you get the idea. And the problem is only thing that it seems like the text is behind our player game object. You can just play around with the text and you're gonna get hang of it. Basically just play around with the text element and you will get hang of it. So I hope you get the idea of this, how you can make floating text and shoot projectile with some certain amount of time. And lastly, I want to thank you all of you guys for watching the video till the end. So lastly, thanks for watching this video.